Okay, folks, so we're going to get started. I'm sure people will continue to join us. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Hollinson. I'm the CEO of the Square Metre Group, which incorporates crowd safety training. So we're a training and consultancy company, and we deliver predominantly crowd safety training across the world. The reason we wanted to put some of these webinars together, obviously the majority of us are all in the same position at the moment. The events industry has just suddenly come to a stop. Everybody's found themselves losing work, sadly, and events are being cancelled all over the place. So this is a really good opportunity for us all to come together, share ideas, and learn from each other. And what we would like to do over the coming weeks is provide a number of webinars with different themes. So we're going to be looking to you guys to potentially tell us what you'd like to see, and we can pull in a host of experts. And the idea is we do that from around the world and see what lessons have been learned in different countries with certain things as well. So before we get started today, there's a couple of sort of housekeeping things, just in case anybody's not really used Zoom before. At the bottom of your screen, or for some people it comes up at the top, you've got a variety of actions there, including raising your hand, the chat function, which most people seem to have found, and a Q&A function. Okay, today, because there's so many people logged on, what we're predominantly going to use is the Q&A function. If you go into that, that gives you the ability to ask a question. Okay, if you type that in, and everybody else will be able to see that. Now, if you see a question that you'd really like to hear the answer to, it's got the like symbol just underneath, which is a thumbs up. If you click on that, it will boost and prioritize the question to the top. So we can, at regular intervals, Jim will stop and he will look at the questions, and we will answer the most prioritized questions initially. Okay. At the end of the session, we'll host another Q&A session where we can unmute people and they can ask the questions themselves of Jim if you've got any questions. Okay. At the end of the presentation, slides will be made available if anybody wants them. We can send them to you. And we've been asked the question a number of times now if we'll provide CPD certificates. Anybody who stays till the end will be sent a CPD certificate from Crowd Safety Training as well. Okay, so I'd like to start by introducing those again who don't know him, and those who do know him will remember him. This is Jim Goddard, who's going to be talking to you today about the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles, or Jesip as it's known as well. So I'm going to mute myself. If anyone's got any questions, I'll say use the Q&A function. We've got a couple of polls that might pop up. If you could help us with those, it's fantastic, and we'll pick up the questions as we go along. Thank you. Jim?
Okay, thank you, Andy. I assume everybody can now hear me. Good afternoon to you all. Very weird way of teaching, and bear with me, this is my very first time of doing anything like this. So if it's stifled or doesn't flow, my apologies. As has been said, I'm very much one for interactive training. So if there is issues which are cropping up or questions, please throw them into it. It will only work really by yourselves giving me in directions which way you want to go. A little bit about us before we start then, about Square Metre Company, and straight away I don't seem to be flowing. There we go. So Square Metre Group, crowd safety training, we're a bit of a centre of excellence for crowd risk analysis and crowd safety training. Between us as a team, we deliver and consult various organisations around the world for various events. We have an expertise in crowd safety management from local events, music events, football stadia, and various other large organisations where we give quite a large bit of crowd safety work. Square Metre Group works within various other organisations and has quite a large, wide base. But my side of it is very much on the crowd safety management side of things. These are some of the events and organisations we've been working with in recent times, and there are many more to add to the list, which you can see within there. We've got quite a large background. I'll go into my background in a bit, but between the group of us, tend to cover quite a wide range of roles and responsibilities. So just a little bit about me. My name is Jim Goddard. I was a former police officer and a critical incident manager working at various events, and had a large background in training of commanders to manage major incidents and events. And I was an advisor for large-scale operations events across the UK. On retirement from the police service, I've become a consultant with Metre Group, and within my roles, I've also been the safety officer for Liverpool Football Club, crowd safety manager for Glastonbury Festival, and various other operational events. I still are active operationally as a consultant on various events and incidents. Aim of this session then. So during the course of the next hour or so, and leading into an hour and a half, I'm here to try and introduce you to Jesip and the principles around the whole process. To clarify a lot of these issues, there is a website which gives brilliant access to a lot more information than I'm going to provide. There's an app which can be downloaded by Jesip, and I do recommend everybody to do so. It is a useful tool to have within any event organization. I'm going to steer a lot of my presentation towards the events industry, and that's not to take away anything from the Jesip models and principles, but I'm going to apply the principles that are described in this event into the events industry and give it a little bit of an indication of where things flow. So Jesip, the whole principle of Jesip is to work together to save lives. And it really is the bit which it's all come about from. It all started really from a program which was working back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and I was quite heavily involved with as a trainer, as a consultant with the police service. On the back of quite a large number of major incidents and occasionally disasters around the UK, where police service and other blue light services were all working with this common goal, but not necessarily working together. And the program, as it initially was classed, was put together to try to create a common language to deal with major incidents. So we had an understanding of who was taking the principal lead, who was managing the event, and who had what roles and responsibilities. The Jesip program, as it was then, has since been classed as being the Jesip Joint Interoperability Principles. And the principles are really what comes out of it. And what I'm going to go through today are those joint interoperability principles, and just explain how it works in real simple terms, and then at times link it to the events that we're dealing with. Whilst the Jesip model was put in place to deal with for major incidents initially, it really comes in place that it's there to deal with any incident, and that's what I'm going to try and create and explain. So let's go back a little bit of history before we start. So the Jesip model and the program itself was created in events of various major incidents and disasters. And as we said, at times it was felt that there was conflicting and uncoordinated responses. The police service, the ambulance service, the fire service, etc., all were working at times with the same goal, but not necessarily in coordination. And that created confusion. At times, there has been some occasions where there has been clear lacking of coordination, which caused problems. One of the key ones was the Buncefield chemical fire, which created a lot of problems. And the instance there was relating to the understanding of who was taking responsibility and taking lead at any one time. Other disasters came through, and these were not just disasters led to loss of life, but major incidents, for example, the flooding, whereby the Environment Agency would not necessarily consider initially at that point as being one of the major partners involved. Clearly, later understanding was that the major incident response is not just about one or other blue light agency, but it's about any agency where a substantial risk or threat is put to that capability and capacity to put in place. Right now, we're facing probably the biggest major incident that our country has ever faced, and the world as a whole has ever faced. The major incident taking place for the NHS and the medical services is requiring an input from all agencies. And this is why this was put together. And Jesip, I've seen used on many occasions over the last few days, the principles of Jesip in response to the actual incidents that are taking place today. So it was put in place to create a commonality of response. And the principles of the response were initially aimed for major incidents. But it's now quite apparent that the instance or the principles can apply to any incident. And that's really what I'm going to look at. Any event, any incident. Take it to the small scale rather than sticking with the large scale where Jesip started from. So some events, some incidents. I'm just going to adjust my camera because it's wobbling slightly. I do apologise, guys. So event management. I'm personally very much involved in the festival world and the music world, and we have lots of different events, but also the football world, from a large scale dealing with large scale football matches to the small scale. And these are just some events I've happened to be involved in recent times, and you can see the different styles and events and issues. Event management isn't just about dealing with large crowds, it's about dealing with small groups of people, and it's understanding and pulling together the principles of all the elements to make sure people are kept safe. At the same time, we also have incident management, where it's when you're actually dealing with an incident itself during an event. And it could be dealing with a large number of casualties, large response to a major incident, or a crime scene perhaps, the actual incidents involved in place. And of course, some of the tragedies, etc., we see at various events and organisations. And as we all know, that at an event, a critical incident or an incident could later become a major incident, depending on the problems faced. The principles of Jesip cross over all those boundaries, and that's really what we're trying to put in place here, to get people to understand that the models and theories put in place initially to deal with major incidents are actually there, which cover across the whole board. So, the principles. The key principles are very straightforward. That the commanders who make relevant decisions need to co-locate. That they have to be able to communicate with each other in a language that everybody clearly understands. That when responding to or managing an incident or event, they have the ability to coordinate and understand whose roles and responsibilities are what, and to jointly understand risk. And that's probably one of the greatest issues in place in all of this, is if people do not have a joint, clear understanding of risk, then people are likely to take actions or take inaction which could put others at risk simply by the fact that they don't understand the implications to another organization. And a clear one for everybody is the shared situational awareness. And I will go through each of those little bits in time. So co-locate. The actual original start point was that I'm going to go back to my original policing days, really, that when dealing with large events, large major events, we'd have several control rooms running alongside each other: police control, ambulance control, fire service control, event organizers control. And everybody was thought they were working in the same direction, but we're working perhaps in silos, not intentionally, just how the principles come in place. You turn up at a scene of a major incident, or you'd be running perhaps a major festival, and there'd be lots of small control centers. One of the key elements that came out of Jesip is that all the key decision makers need to co-locate with commanders as soon as practicable in a single, safe and identifiable location. Now, we obviously talk about major incidents, but we could still be looking at festivals and events, which is the world I'm going to be coming in, where now you see more and more the coordinated joint event liaison team, or the control room, or the incident management room, where you have everything from medical services, control room staff, security, fire, local authority, environment agency. Any relevant decision-making partner is co-located now. And you'll see these sort of events that you have in place for football stadia, for festival management events. The principles of putting a co-located command team in one location now sits across the board. And as I say, going back some years to my early policing command career, that wasn't the case. By putting this now at an early stage for every event, the joint location for a control room means everybody has a shared understanding. This is one of the key principles for everything involved. Communicate. And the biggest one in place, and I appreciate we have people on board here from across the world, and English may not be the language of first choice. But for us working with the process, we need to speak in a clear and understanding language. That doesn't mean to say about the principles of the English language, but it's the avoiding of jargon. And it's understanding that perhaps each of the different services have a language or use of words that is their language, their words, which everybody will understand within their industry, but maybe not understood across the board. A classic example which is going to use now, we talk about the event control room. How many different titles of name is that given? An ELT, a control room, incident response, management room, whatever it may be. And we need to understand that in the world of communication for events, particularly at critical incident, or let's hope never to be major incident, that the ability to understand a plain language and have clear words and understanding in place will save an awful lot of confusion. The real challenge comes about that people have abbreviations for words and letters abbreviations, and what they think might mean one thing is that the 3-letter abbreviation for one organization may mean something completely different to another. So what we're really looking to put in place is having a clear and common language in place that we all understand and all parties can understand, particularly at times of crisis. One of my issues I sometimes have in place is the use of code words during emergencies. I'm sure we've all used them in code phrases for security companies on a scene. If you're working in the security industry, in 1 week you're working on one event, the second week you're on a different event, where code black, code red might be one thing for one organization and might be something completely different for another. And so the use of common language, which everybody understands, is absolutely key. The coordination needs to be absolutely key for any event with the Jesip principles is coordination and understanding who is the lead service at any one time. It's quite clear that leads and priorities may change and that there are times that the lead organization might have different needs. So whilst the fire and rescue service may have a need to deal with the initial response, the police service may later on have to deal with the investigation into what's happened, and that might be led by the police service or might be led by the health and safety executive, for example. And it is understanding at each stage who has got what priority and what phase. So by the creation of regular meetings, the event liaison team meetings and the shared understanding enables people to coordinate exactly what is going on. And the key principles of the Jesip process is exactly that: the communication, the coordination, and the co-location. So the coordination here is exactly clear, so that everybody understands what they've got, where they're going to be, who's doing what. And by this stage, if everybody is coordinated together, we have a common principle and very straightforward process in place. The joint understanding of risk is key, is understanding of information and sharing. Now we understand there may be security reasons why the sharing of information, for example, about crime investigation might be limited. But the sharing of risk and understanding of whatever is facing, what is actually in place, is absolutely key on all these things. What invariably happens is one organization may be in aware of a piece of information and they think that others are aware of that information too. So what we tend to put in place on a regular basis is regular scheduled meetings where we go around the table and understanding exactly what's everybody got. So if I was running a festival or an event, we have regular set out every 2, 3, 4 hours, depending. Shared meetings where we go around the table and everybody understands what is happening, what they're facing, what their problems are, what they think is on the horizon. And by that process, we have a shared understanding of risk, not just of what we have as a whole of the organization, but what our partners may be facing. So for example, you may have one organization who right now is having a challenge because they have a staffing issue, a lack of electricity, a lack of problem, whatever it may be, which no other people would know about unless it's taken to those meetings. So whether it be at a critical incident and we're sharing information on a very regular basis, on a very frequent basis, or perhaps a festival site, an event site, where we're having regular meetings to just gather together. But by having that shared understanding of risk, we can then understand what we're facing. So for example, it might be on a security of an event, as I'm showing here, where we have the organization realizing that by actually liaising with the police service and the security, we can then work out who's going to take what responsibility and what's going to happen next. And there's an understanding of the shared risk. In this particular occasion that the photograph is showing here, it was where a large group of individuals were attending and were making it very clear they're going to try and force their way into a festival site without paying for a process. And whilst this was a security matter, it became a policing issue to prevent crime and disorder. But we had a shared understanding of the risk, And by simply putting in place the right resources in the right way and putting a show of force together, showing that we were working in unity, the threat was diminished. And it's that process of understanding what the threats and hazards are. The police knew what their role were, the security company knew what their roles were. And again, talking about the meetings and processes in place, it's then having a shared situational awareness by using two distinct models. And it's these two models I'm really going to look at over the next 40 minutes or so. The two models are methane and the joint decision model. You may have seen these used quite a lot in the past, but I'm going to just try and explain them and understand where they fit within our process. And the methane and joint intelligence model, joint decision model, are really the two we're going to look at. So I'll start with these ones. So the joint decision model. This has come from various different models which have been put in place. Policing wise, we were using for a long time the national decision model, and this has been used in various models. There's a process which is just using a flow chart which enables people to understand what is facing people, what the threats are and how to deal with it. And I'm just going to go through it in a very simple process. The models put in place here, which was the, oops, I've gone on the wrong screen. The model put in place here really was put in place to enable a clear understanding what everybody's facing. And as it says in the middle of this section, it is about working together to reduce harm and save lives. And I'll just go over each section at a time. The first phase of any decision-making process is about facing what you've got, understanding the information and intelligence ahead of you. So if we take a simple process of the photograph I showed you just now, with the large group of people trying to enter a festival site without tickets, and we are understanding there's further problems. The first intelligence coming through was, or first information coming through, was explaining that there was a large group of people gathering. That's information. Information is simply what we've got in place of us. The intelligence side of it is something which has actually been verified. And the intelligence came back from the police service very quickly to say that this group were known to be an organized group, known to be involved in criminal activities, and had members within the group who were likely to be violent and aggressive to others and had other criminal activity potential. So we had a very quick piece of information that we had a large group coming towards us. They were going to try and force past the queues, going to try and come into the group, into the venue, and with the intention of either criminality and a potential for using violence. The next phase is to consider and assess the risks and work out a quick strategy. So the risks which were identified very quickly was that this group were going to have several risks to us. They had the potential for violence, potential for criminality. They had the potential for forcing their way onto a site, which would change the security values within the site itself, would potentially overload the actual venue, and would have the potential for putting people at harm. Within the same process, we then had to work out a very quick strategy. The strategy was we were not going to let them come in. But the understanding of it is there's two different roles within the two different positions. The police service had one set of roles, and the security company have another set of roles. Security were obviously there to try and protect the venue itself. So the question was very quickly asked, right, who's got what powers and policies? The security company clearly have their own powers and policies to stop people coming in, and the police have powers to go further out. The security company don't have powers which were going onto the streets itself. So the understanding of the actual process very quickly was understanding which organization had which powers to do what. So whilst the security company were in a strong position to prevent people coming on site because it was a position of the Security Industry Authority and they had the licensing powers, their ability to control and use force to stop people further out in the streets was very limited. Whilst working with the police service, it then became very clear who had what powers to do what roles, and we could understand what we could do very quickly. And the process of decision making was working very closely together. The options and contingencies were made available. So in position of these What you're now considering on each occasion is working out what range of options you have available to you. Again, going to the scenario we're discussing. There was a wide range of options available, from police using force and show of force, but the initial process in place was to close the gates, stop all action, and enable us to stop any incidents coming on site, then allow the police to deal with the incidents off site. And by working together, the principles were put in place very quickly. Same thing goes if you have a critical incident or major incident site, is understanding what options you have available to you and what contingencies you can put in place. And by understanding what the threats and the powers each organization has got, you can look at the contingencies as well as the options available to you. And the whole idea is to make a straight, free-flowing process. This occasion it worked extremely well. Then very quickly, looking at the actions and options you've got, taking action and reviewing what has happened, and actually putting in place a process. So once you've got a decision made, we understand our actions, we can now take the decision and put it in place. So this brings it all together, and this is a flowing process. The joint decision model is not meant to be a quick, right, we've made one decision, that's it. It is a constant flowing process. And if commanders and managers and leaders are following the same process all the way through, what it enables them to do is have an understanding of where they are, their decision-making process at each stage. So as you go through a process, you have effectively the information intelligence has been gathered, understood, we've assessed our risks and created a strategy, we've understood what powers we've all got, options have been identified, and we've taken action. And then you review and go again. What has happened this time? Has that process changed? Have we got more information available to us? Has the actions we've taken changed the picture? By everybody working through this model and following this model at the same time, it enables us to work out where we are. Same thing goes for the meeting process when we talk about having the co-location of commanders and co-location of leaders. Personally, whenever I'm working through as a ELT commander, event liaison team, where I'm working to put in place a briefing or a debriefing, by following this model and asking everybody what they've got, everybody understands where they are. So what information have we got? Where are we? What are the risks we're facing? How do we want to deal with it? Who has got the powers to do with what section of it? What options have we got to deal with that problem? What contingencies can we consider calling upon? And how are we going to deal with it? And by following that process on a regular basis and spinning that wheel, what you're effectively doing is enabling everybody to understand where we are. Certainly from the policing world, it was a very regular model to be used constantly followed through. But by following that process and leading it into the world which we've discussed, into the events world, this has become the common world and the common language for most people, and it's used on a regular position. The biggest thing, however, what I want to get people to understand is logging your decision and actually getting people to record their process and actually record what they've done, making logs, making notes, having somebody available to you who's actually recording it. Now, the recording process can be by way of a logist, can be by way of having a company or an organization who's got a person who's actually recording you, record things on your phone, making little notes. The biggest thing is when there's so much is going on is having the ability that there's a note being made so that later on you can come back to it. Because it's very possible that you can look to go back and rechange your decision, review what's happened. You've had somebody who's made a decision for you or made a decision in process, and then you realize the information has changed. And whilst you were making the right decision at that moment, later on with the change of information and change of threat, you can review that decision and make amendments to it. There's nothing wrong with going back and making those amendments. The second key model which we're looking at, and really what takes all of this in place, is the model for methane. And we'll pull all that one in place with this. So the methane is actually start off as being about declaring a major incident. And really, when we started the whole Jesip program, as was then, it was about declaring a major incident and putting everything in place to a major incident. But the reality is that nowadays, this applies to all events. So just to clarify what a major incident is, and this is coming from the College of Policing. A major incident is an event or situation requiring a response under one or more of the emergency services major incident plans. This will usually include involving large numbers of people, either directly or indirectly. As we say, this is something which is clearly going on for the moment. I'll come back to those questions over here. I'll come to some questions at the end of this section. So the major incident process is something which was for large events. Now, reality is that actually, when we came away from all this, the process was Jesip. Whilst it was all about major incidents and major processes, the real issue for it was that the models worked for all events and all processes. And that is why we've changed it. Instead of being methane, it is ethane. So you can consider whether it is a major incident, but if it's not a major incident, you still follow the same principles. I'm just going to go back to one of the questions which has cropped up, which I think is very relevant to the issue regarding logists. There are various programs we can put together, and we have put together regarding the training of logists, but the principles are you can openly have a person with you who is simply taking notes, and then you can make your own log notes. But we at Square Metre will give processes for the actual creation and delivery of logist courses. The key understanding of the logist role is that the person who's doing the log needs to understand the role and responsibility of the commander that they're taking notes for and what they're trying to achieve. And it will require a logist to work in partnership with their manager or commander, and having being a dictating like a secretarial style, but taking the key points, key principles, who has been spoken to, what the key points of a meeting were. So for example, if we're doing an event liaison team meeting, it is having a set of notes, the minutes and actions which have been taken, which are clearly understood and distributed. The notes you are taking, particularly if you're an incident manager or commander, may be disclosable later on. So it's making sure you have their own process in place. There are lots of different needs for those minutes, but it's making sure they're disclosable. And as has been said, there are lots of organizations will run courses to train people to do so. Whilst we will use those for major incident planning as well, when we're looking at the events we're talking of for the moment, the Jesip principles for this is effectively making sure that your notes are relevant to your event and enable you to learn from it. So to come back into ethane. So whilst Jesip was created for the process of major incident response, what has happened is become more and more involved with the management of normal events. And it enables us now to really be used as a process for management of everything. So I'm just going to go some of the very basic principle of the methane and ethane model. Oh, for a reason not going for. So the first thing, if you've got an incident, is understanding the exact location. And there are various models now to consider about the exact location, which really are really beneficial. The What 3 Words app, which is coming through, is becoming more and more prevalent, and there are lots of other things to consider. But it's having an exact location when it's in place. When you have perhaps blue light services who are now so stretched, taking the policing service and the ambulance service, which are as stretched as can be nowadays, you have people traveling vast areas to travel in and give a response to an incident. So the people who are attending may not have local knowledge of where they're actually attending. You may be having an event or incident take place, which is perhaps in quite a remote field or location. So given the exact location is absolutely key so that people understand what is the clear location given. Postcodes, grid references, What 3 Words are absolutely key so people understand what to get into. And in the days where we're working from sat nav, where people don't necessarily have the local knowledge, it is making sure there's a clear understanding. Postcodes, zip codes, one of the clear understandings of problems is that they can cover wide areas. So if it's not clear what your location is, if you're given a venue where you're having perhaps a festival or an event and you've got an incident taking place, make sure that the postcode which is being given, or the zip code which is being given, is exact to the location and not just a generic place. Exact location, absolutely key for ethane. The next bit is about the type of incident we're dealing with, and language is absolutely key here. So the use of clear and common language is absolutely key when I'm talking about type of incident. And we're really keen on this. Avoid the use of jargon. And as I said earlier, one of the biggest problems with code words is people using words which people assume that a code black, a code blue, a code red means the same to everybody across every event, across every company. So using language which is clear to understand, using words which people attending an event will get. Using simple stuff so that people can understand very clearly and very quickly what it is they're facing. A tent on fire, 2 cars have collided, a violent male with a knife, a strong smell of gas. It is clear language to understand what the incident people are dealing with, so that our partners are finding an understanding of what they're facing, what the risks are. The clearest one for everybody is obviously the hazards in place, so the clear use of hazards. So for example, yet again, it's avoiding jargon, so that if we've got an incident taking place, be it it's a terrorist incident or a fight, be it a fire or a medical incident, that we have an understanding of what we've got. So if we have other people in the presence with weapons, it is clearly said, clearly understood. Electrical cables sparking or whatever problems may be, there are other structures going to damage people. So it is simply using words, and language that people taking the call, either on the radio or over the incident, can understand clearly. And again, I'm very keen on the understanding of or the use of jargon and abbreviations. What's beneficial to organizations at times, it can in itself create its own round of problems unless people have a clear understanding of the words used. One of the greatest issues regarding Jesip and methane especially is really getting to the process of why or where people are going to get to the location, but most importantly, the access into that venue. So again, giving the clear directions. It's all very well saying this is the location of it, but it's how do we get in? Are there any restrictions? Are there any access issues? Identifying clear landmarks so people can understand where they're coming in. Giving clear words of explanation. So it's not just the location of it, but it's how to get in, what the access routes are. If you're bringing people in on foot, what the best routes to follow to avoid traffic, to avoid congestion. Position somebody to meet and greet people. And that's one of the key ones. So we try to get it, particularly for our ambulance service coming on site or fire service, if they're coming onto a site for an event, is actually getting somebody to meet and greet them and give them a direction where they're going, rather than losing time and getting people to find through, which leads quite clearly then to the creation of RVPs, the rendezvous point, so that we have a clear holding point. One of the biggest things that came out from Jesip when it was originally pulled together was the emergency services pooling into a major incident at different locations and then being headed up to different positions. So by simply having a one central point of RV where people can meet, be briefed and forwarded on to the next location does make so a much easier process. So whether it's simply meeting the one ambulance which is coming to deal with a casualty or dealing with a major incident response, the methane and the ethane process was about understanding, having a clear direction and having clear routes for people to follow in. But the same thing follows for the egress routes. One of the biggest issues that's cropped up at several major incidents over the years has been that having got a lot of people into a venue and in to deal with the incident is having an egress route, particularly for the ambulance service and the medical providers, excuse me, to enable them to get out again. And there's been more than one incident that's been recorded where at the scene of tragedy that lives were lost or put in harm's way, because although ambulances were able to get to the scene, there was such congestion that there was no way out. So in our planning for major events, we'll put in place what we will call blue routes. You may give them a different title, but again, it's using that commonality of word. A route which we know that blue light services will follow. So if we have a major incident, we have a clear direction where people are going to come in on an emergency route, come into whatever location it may be, and then have an egress route to follow out. If we're talking of a football stadium, it's how to get onto the pitch, how to get off the pitch. If we're talking into a concert, it's taking a route into a festival site, which is away from the public route, may not be through the main public routes coming in, and then the vehicles can access and egress accordingly. So the creation then of one-way systems is absolutely key, and making sure that information is shared to partners so that we have everybody understanding that the routes to follow in and out is according. This is key in the planning phase. So if you're an event organizer and you're planning an event, we really do look for you to put in your plans in place to have a plan which shows you've already considered, in the event of a major incident or critical incident, that you have a route already planned to enable people to come in place and follow that route. The next one is number of casualties and issues required, and this is very clear. It's the number of casualties and the nature of their injuries. You could have a incident take place where there's a large number of casualties, but it's that triaging and prioritizing of patients. And the ambulance service and the medical responders will need to understand what they are facing. So it's not just simply a case of we need an ambulance. It is an understanding of what they've got and why. So the questions being used in place is use again the clear and common language. So they have an understanding of what's in place. So the phrases are used are clear for all. So in this occasion, 6 people with crush injuries, 1 is struggling to breathe. It enables our partners to understand what they're facing very quickly, how, and again, using that joint decision model, that they've received that information, they can understand the threat that they've got from that, they can make a quick response decision, they can work out the contingents and options they need to send, and they can send the relevantly trained and equipped personnel to deal with it. They can also work out whether or not the response requires anything. Again, process in place, clear in description, man with chest pains, a child with burns to arms, an unconscious female believes she's taken drugs. By using very clear language with the numbers of people injured and what sort of injury they are facing in very simple terms, enables our partners to make quick assessments. Anybody who's had to phone 999 of recent times to ask for an ambulance will get the same question usually coming through. Is the casualty conscious and breathing? It enables them to make very rapid process decisions so they can start to triage the casualties risks before they've started to send anybody to the event. It is absolutely key, because by having people with a clear understanding of the priority, the medical providers can understand then what they're going to send. And then the emergency services, what we've actually got. And the questions are simply required. What services do you require and what facilities do you have at the scene already? In the Jesip, when it first started, and it was about major incident response, as commanders, our first assessment, or one of our first assessments, was to understand what emergency services we had at the scene and what further services we require. But now we're talking of days when we're going to be looking at event organisers with very limited event facilities on site for the blue light services. So you may be required to provide your own fire service, you may be required to provide your own medical services, your security services, etc. So whilst you're asking for fire, ambulance, police, whatever it may be, it's having a clear understanding of what you require them for and the level of threat you're already facing. So for example, for the police, it might be saying, we have detained an offender and he is being violent. It clarifies then what you've got, very simple terms, rather than we just need the police. Again, the fire service request. We have several tents on fire. Our fire service team are requesting support of local fire and rescue. Because if in your event management plan, you've already got something in place and they've reached a stage where they've reached their capacity or capability being challenged, you're now actually saying we require more. And it gives the fire service attending a clear picture of what they are facing. Again, an ambulance request, medical service on site are requesting an urgent ambulance for an unconscious female not breathing. Clear, unequivocal words being put in place. So when you're requesting the emergency service in the ethane and methane, it is not just we need fire, we need ambulance, we need medical. It is putting things in place so that it's actually clear from the process. And the whole process of the principle for Jesip was to have an understanding of common and shared understanding of risk. And that really was what this was all about. Again, as we say, common language enables the blue light services to make clear decisions about the resources required. It is not meant to be as a you are taking over their role. It has given them the ability to apply the correct resources to the correct event, rather than this is an all-encompassing, we need everything. Reality is for Jesip that having put this in place, you're really enabling yourselves to manage events more clearly, whilst enabling our partners to come in place when required. So some basics. And this really was meant to be as simple as this. Jesip was very, very straightforward and is very straightforward. It was created to provide a commonality of process for the command and control of major incidents, and the principles can be applied to response to and management of any incident. And it's only those three principles really. It is the methane or ethane, it is the joint decision model, and it is the model that shows the principles of co-locating, coordinating, communicating, a shared understanding of risk, and a shared understanding of priorities. So when you have the events and event organizations you're putting in place, all you're really putting in place for your plan is showing you've got a shared control room, a shared process, so you have everything ready with all your services and all your event organizers already put in place. So you have your medical team, your coordinator, and things in place. On this event, for this festival, the gentleman in the middle stood up is the actual event organizer. He's managing the things put in place. He is coordinating around him. You have police at the front row, you have medical services at the back, you have security services, you have various other organizations. A similar sort of scenario, this tent is a fireworks display. Again, the command control processes with medical services, security, traffic management. And these are all put in very simple processes. The idea being very simply to let people understand that if you have a coordinated response with shared communication and every understanding, when an incident occurs, you then have a shared awareness of process. And that can be from the largest football stadium, largest events, to the smallest of incidents on the side of the roadside. The idea is really to get shared understanding. So that's the bit. It's actually, the introduction to Jesip is very straightforward and was always meant to be very simplistic. It was used for major incident management, and it was used at the beginning, well, just to bring everybody up together. But what we want to put in place now is to sharing it so that we as event organizers and critical incident managers simply use those three principles to run with it. So I've put a few questions in common place. I'm just going to try and put on my screen. Andy, you're probably in a position to read it better than I am. So any Q&A you want to come back at me with?
Sorry, Jim, couldn't find the mute button.
Technology at our best. Okay, so that was really it. The idea is to simply have a straightforward introduction to Jesip. It was, the whole idea of the process was to give what the three key principles are of the JDM, of methane stroke ethane, and the Jesip principles of co-location, etc. So I just wanted to give people an understanding really of those bits and then allow people to put in place. So any questions that have cropped up which we've not dealt with?
So Jim, there's a question on there. Are you finding that most agencies are adopting what three words as a common language? I'm
finding that commercially, some people are using it. So for example, festivals, etc. I wouldn't say that the police service, emergency services are using it as a regular basis. It is an oncoming or on developing event. It is commercial, from my understanding, so it is a private event. So whether that's going to be widely adopted by all, I wouldn't like to argue. I think that, and I use it, and I think it is an excellent, but this is a personal use of it rather than as a an endorsement by me. I do think that having a clear mapping process, GDPS, etc., the GPS, etc., is absolutely essential. Whether what 3 words is the way to go, I'm not sure, because I think a lot of people are looking at it as being a commercial side of it. But actually, as in personal terms, using it, I found it excellent.
Okay, the next question we've got on here is, would you identify multiple suitable RVPs in the planning phase of the event?
I think it always going to depend on the size of your event and venue. You and I deal with a very large festival on a site in Somerset, and there are multiple RVPs, RVP1, RVP2, RVP3, which enables us to send people to the north, south, east, west, etc. of the site accordingly. The problem is making sure there's commonality of information. So if we're going to have more than one RVP in a planning process, it is making sure that that RVP is clearly marked as being 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever word is giving to it. And also making sure that the blue light services and partners who may be needing to attend it are aware of those different locations in advance, so that they are shared of the plans and shared of those processes. And again, I still will go for the argument regarding signage, so that it's clear signage in and a clear signage out. It all is going to come down to the size of the venue and the size of the event you're dealing with.
Okay, thanks for that. The next question, I've got my own opinions on this one as well. We've asked, do you recommend code words are abandoned altogether in the live event setting? Is there a concern in instilling panic in a crowd who may overhear? Now, I know there's a number of studies that we've done together with Professor John Drury on this, and he's got lots of interesting opinions on this, and he's done lots of research into this. But Jim, do you want to answer that, and I'll chip in as well?
The first bit comes down to let's deal with within our staff and common words within our staff and people. So one of the challenges is about radio discipline and people listening on a radio and then getting code words. With the greatest respect to some of the security operatives we deal with, we don't always have the same staff at the same event every single week. And some of our security staff we have are freelancers or moving around from event to event to event. And they get given a hot briefing at the beginning of their event, given the code words for that event. They do their day's work. The next week they go to another event. And as we know, during the summer festival season, some of these guys are working 2 or 3 events over the same weekend. My challenge there is that if we're using a radio process and we have a communication model which says, right, this is code black, code red, code blue, and these guys, whilst under pressure, suddenly come up with the wrong phrase at the wrong time, or they miss it because they don't understand what it means, it is an unfair process. So I'm actually of the view that when we're using radio, I like to have one common language, particularly when we've got earpieces, etc. in, is the issue of having people understand. The question comes up regarding, people always say, right, well, if you've got radios which can be overheard by the public, and they might hear there is a incident taking place. So I get that. So the question first of all comes down to the security of radios, earpieces, and that management. You've got to balance the threats of people hearing the incident taking place and what it might be. It could be a fire, it could be a fight, it could be a terrorist incident, versus the ability of our staff under pressure to be able to use simple words and language. So, if code red for your event means that there's a fire, and code red for the next event means there's a man with a gun, that's quite a significant difference of threat. So we need to have common language where possible. The second bit is regarding the code words put out over the air for tannoys. So for example, you could have the words, you know, could Mr. Ash come to the secretary's office over the control room or over the tannoy system? Well, that's fine if everybody understands what that is. But then what if some of the public also know what that means? So it's again, using words or language which can be understood by people, but it's not going to instill fear or anxiety. I won't use the word of anything other than fear or anxiety. And as you quite said, there's various studies about what impact by giving information to people has on crowds. So there's a double hit in this, but I'm looking at it from our perspective, from communication to our event staff, our event organizers and our security staff, of them being able to communicate clear words to the control room so everybody understands what they're facing.
Okay, thanks. And if anybody's interested and would like some links to Professor John Drury's work on human behaviour and mass panic, he certainly addresses this subject in what information we should give to crowds and basically what we should trust them with, given the theory that sort of if we talk to a crowd and ask them to evacuate without giving them the right levels of information, are they going to leave or are they just going to stay there until they find out what's going on? But really interesting. If anyone wants those links, just put your name and your email. I've got your email addresses. Just put your name in the chat, please, and I'll send some links to you afterwards.
There's some very good, really excellent reading comes out of that. So I highly support that recommendation.
Alternatively, I could have a chat with him and get him to do a future webinar for us on that subject in particular, which would be really interesting. Okay.
Okay.
Next question. On the list, where you've a police silver or gold control off site, should there be a representative from the event in those locations, given the principle of co-location? Good question.
It is a very good question, and it's an eternal question. So the answer is possibly, and it's going to depend. So let's take a football stadia, for example. What you've got effectively is a football stadium with a control room with the safety officer, maybe a representative from the police service, a representative from the ambulance service, and whatever security, etc. That is your forward control point. The question will be, well, actually, we're still running a control room up in our headquarters. Should we have a representative there? I think personally that the representation at the control point is sufficient. It doesn't need to require to be at the police control. You have to remember that the police control point is dealing with other incidents as well. So your one event, your one operation is one element of a whole policing operation. But I have dealt with events and operations where we have put representatives in the police control at the same time. So large protests where we've had at the site of large factories or events where we had to have representative of their security personnel within site. It was considered appropriate that whilst we had a forward control point, we had a representative at the gold so that you can understand the strategic side of things. At major incident planning, certainly when you're looking for a major incident, so I'll go back to the response to the flooding in Somerset, which we had recently or a few years ago, real major incident come in place there, which had in place then forward control points, but we also had the local authority and representatives from community groups working together with us in the gold control at the same time. But for your most common events, so your music festival, your concert, your forward control point, your event liaison team, your event control room, whatever put in place, that is the place where the command and control will sit in place. Now, the police may elect only to put a bronze commander or a local incident manager in site, or maybe a local representative. That would be perfectly acceptable. The idea is, have we got the ability to coordinate and communicate? So if they're putting in place a liaison point, that's absolutely fine. You have also the issue which could come in place where the police have elected not to put anybody into a control room, but instead they just have it by way of communication. That is their risk assessment. And then by way of them, if they have an incident occur, may send their first representative to the control room to make that coordination point. So it's all about balance and risk. And the police will always say to you, they haven't got the ability to put somebody in place for every event. And quite rightly so. It's based on threat and risk assessment. Next one.
Okay, that's a good question. Next one we've got, is it important to have a desktop stroke tabletop to an event using the various commanders who'll be present at the event, so they build up a relationship with the event organizer and everybody knows each other's roles, and important for the logists to attend also?
Yeah, I'm very keen on this process. It has been proven time and time again that if you run a tabletop exercise, it is not about testing the events to the point of destruction. And some people take the misunderstanding when they're running tabletop exercises, oh, it's about proving you're failing. It's about gaining confidence. So the idea here is to enable people to work together as a team, to practice, to coordinate exactly these principles we've set in place. So we have a series of scenarios or hypotheses that enable the command team to coordinate, to understand where they would co-locate, to understand how they would communicate, and then understand how they would share the systems of risk. And that really follows the principles of Jesip, absolutely. So what you're putting in place then is you've already tested it and worked together. So on the day of working in for the event itself, you're not having to start that building of relationships. You also put in place a series of reasonable scenarios that you can face. A bit of fire, a bit of criminal assault, be it some form of disaster. So you can then check and test your response to a range of incidents. One of which would be about the requirement to bring in emergency services or partner agencies from outside. So again, that's where you talk about your methane and ethane with your access, your RVP, so that then you've actually tested, would everybody understand where that is? So if you've put in place a test beforehand, which has shown that actually we wouldn't be able to find this RVP, or this RVP wouldn't be suitable for bringing a fire tender through because the gates are too small or whatever else. By doing all that in place in advance, you've saved yourself significant risk on the time event. So I absolutely support that idea every single time.
Okay, brilliant. What is the best way to establish the joined up control and communication if you have an incident on site where you don't have a gold and silver on site and just have to call 999? Obviously passing as much information at the start, but as other agencies get involved, as the incident may develop.
So that's really what this event and this speech was really about. The initial manager at the scene will call the site in. So let's just take us. We've got an incident manager working for an event organization. They call it in, and they're providing the first piece of information. So that information given during ethane enables the emergency services to coordinate a response. Effectively, the first emergency response unit attending will become the first lead, and the process, what happens is the command and control structure. So I'll put the policing side of it in place. So the first officers attending the scene manage the scene and feed it back into the control room, into their control room. Then the next phase you got will be the local incident manager, the local critical incident manager will attend. They become your bronze. They'll start managing, working through to the control room. The structure will build accordingly. But if you've already put a process in place in advance, where you've already got a plan in place, and that's where it means that people understand what the processes are. The idea simply being that if you've got a command structure so that your critical incident manager or incident manager knows that their role at the time is to hold the scene, liaise with the first emergency services, share information, coordinate and co-locate, we can then start building that process. In the response to major incident, that may take a while to put everything in place. But the idea is, if the first responding units have got somebody to go to, that incident manager at the scene, they can find out the information, they can share the information, co-locate, and start working in partnership together.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Do you think that all emergency services are talking the same language? Are they following the same processes and procedures and having the same strategy?
Certainly in the United Kingdom, and I'm going to expand our family of partners. It's not just ambulance, fire, it's Coast Guard, it's environmental health, it's the water responses, it's Coast Guard, everything else comes with it. Yeah, we've all been going through this process of understanding structure and dealing with the Jesip program was spread out so that Jesip principles were shared by all. And I do feel that that's become quite commonality of approach. Now, I can't comment for outside the United Kingdom. I appreciate we've got various people online who are from outside, but certainly within the United Kingdom, that principle has been fairly well trained out to command teams.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly when I was delivering that training, I was delivering that training in the police service, and it wasn't just to police service commanders. All the training was always multi-agency training. So in the room, we'd have certainly all the blue light services and many other agencies as well. So included in that agencies when I was delivering the training was electricity board, water services, wide ranging, not just blue light or considered blue light. It was anybody who has a first responder process were incorporated in the training we were delivering.
Okay, the next question, and it's from someone who's obviously got some experience of this. Gold, silver and bronze are still being used by some events, but not necessarily used by the emergency services that are following Jesip. What's your view?
Yeah, and it is a relevant place. The strategic, tactical and operational questions keep coming in place. And quite often we have a problem following around the tactical and operational of understanding of what is tactical, what is operational. It is very clear that the emergency services that are following Jesip have got some changes of process. The gold, silver, bronze, and the strategic, tactical, and operational sort of phrases were aligned for a long time. I have seen, and I do tend to agree that at times I have seen a little bit of deviance from that. I'm no longer obviously delivering that sort of training, so I'm in a position. I'm not in a position to quote what the police are doing, why they're changing it, but I have seen that. I have seen that in places. The strategic, tactical, and operational is still very much the phrases used.
Okay, cool. Next question from Alan. Clear, concise use of language is important. Emergency codes in Australia are standardised. Planning for emergencies in the facilities. However, many venues and events don't use them. Code blue equals medical emergency. At one venue over here, code blue is a person in trouble in the swimming pool. Are they drowning? Are they not breathing? Or they're dead? Good point.
Yeah, and as I say, I've seen, I see that so much, and certainly during the festival world over here, where I tend to sort of, as a critical incident manager, work from event to event to event. It's so common, and I say the code blue, code red, code black. Each company tends to use their own phrase, and what you find is, and it's a really interesting bit, is when you have or an event with multiple security companies. So ABC security company is now working alongside XYZ security company, and they both have different code words for the same thing, or the code word is meaning a different thing. So code red, for example, being a good case in point. And the point that she's saying here that somebody having code blue for one thing means one thing, that really is a problem. And that goes back to my whole point that commonality of language is key. And what you have is, and I have seen it in control rooms where you've got two security companies and you've got two members of staff or in a control room which are being managed with two different companies, and somebody calls in a code blue, and one person says that's a fight in a bar, and the other one says, as you say, somebody's drowning in a swimming pool. It does change a process quite clearly. It is one of my frustrations. I say Dr. John Jury has done some good work on this, and it's something we echo in many ways. But it's information what the public knows rather than what he's talking about. It's more about the impact on the crowd. What I'm talking about here is the actual impact on our staff and our ability to manage something.
Okay. I think that's it for the typed questions. If anybody wants to speak and ask a question, they can raise their hand.
I'm unable to see any. I've only got you on my screen, so you'll have to just get to speak.
I can do that if anyone wants to do that. No, I think that's it for the questions. Last chance. Any questions? No, I think that's it for the questions.
Okay, mate.
So I'd like to wrap up. Thanks for that, Jim.
You're most
really
welcome.
Useful. Thank you everybody else for attending. We hope to see you all in our future CPD sessions that we'll send to you if you're signed up to our mailing list. If you're not, I'm sure you'll see them advertised through other people. Thank you very much. We will try and get a recording of this session as well, if it works as it should do. So let me know if you want a copy of that. And we hope to see you all soon, and take care and all stay safe. Thanks.
Thank you all very much.